Is going to go ahead. Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nellie Stagg. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Transformational Homelessness Response Manager here at the Division of Housing, and we are thrilled to have you join us for the first of its kind Certificate of Insurance training. You may be asking yourselves, why are we gathered here on this final day of April? We at the state of Colorado, and therefore the Department of Local Affairs, the Division of Housing, the Office of Homeless Initiatives, we have requirements in every grant agreement that we enter into for the minimum levels of insurance required for all grantees. Insurance, as you well know, protects your agencies, your employees, your assets, and your future ability to meet your mission should catastrophe strike. And as we all know all too well, with the increase of wildfires, floods, and other catastrophic weather events, this risk is real and this risk is growing. So the Division of Housing, we realized that there was a gap in our grantee onboarding and training, specifically regarding certificates of insurance. We particularly noticed this when we did a self-audit of all of the COIs we had on file and noticed a series of issues across them and some real trends that we identified that education here and some initial onboarding was really needed. Just a personal quick plug. This is a training that I wish I had when I was working and leading a nonprofit. I wish I had the language to actually talk to my insurance broker, to know specifically what I needed and to be able to push back or ask for, no, this is specifically what I'm looking for in my COI. So we saw this opportunity to build the capacity of our entire portfolio across the Office of Homeless Initiatives. And we hope that this training not only supports you in meeting the compliance requirements of your specific Division of Housing grant, but also helps your entire organization with just increased knowledge and language around certificates of insurance. And y'all are in for a treat because we have a real expert here who's going to be facilitating this for us. We are delighted to have Brenda Lujan, who is the Department of Local Affairs Procurements and Contracts Manager, who'll be facilitating this training for you all in just a moment. So just overview of the agenda, what you can expect for this next hour. We're going to start off high level, just talking about risk. And then we're really going to break down the components of our certificate of insurance step by step. So every box, every line, what do you need to know and what's required by the Division of Housing. I'm thrilled that our team has put together as well a really helpful resource for you all. So Casey is going to put a link to this in the chat right now. We've developed a certificate of insurance checklist that you can use throughout your work to ensure that your certificates are meeting our expectations. I would encourage you actually to follow along with that checklist as we go throughout this training. It's going to be a really helpful tool for you today and beyond. And just finally, some brief housekeeping before we get going. I'm sure as y'all can see and from the introductions we've been getting in the chat, this is a big group. I'm seeing 130 folks so far. So we are going to ask folks to remain muted when they're not talking to avoid any background chatter or dogs barking, doorbells ringing. But we would love to have your questions throughout this training. So please, please, please use the chat box. We have several staff members here from the Division of Housing. We're going to be keeping an eye on those. I'm going to be the MC for this training. So while Brenda's facilitating, I might pick a couple questions as we go to stop along the way and ask. But otherwise, we're going to be gathering all of those questions to get to at the end or to follow up with you after this training. So please want to make sure everyone leaves with all of their questions answered. Alrighty, and with that, it is my pleasure to hand it over to Brenda Lujan, who is the Procurement and Contracts Manager for the Department of Local Affairs. Take it away, Brenda.
Thank you, Nellie, and good morning, everybody. It's nice to have everybody here, and I hope to do your time justice today. I don't like to read off slides because I know you all can read, and it can get really dry. So I like to do an overview of the slide and kind of give you just some examples, things like that. So if anything doesn't make sense or you have a question, please do drop it in the chat and we can talk about that. I've also asked that Nellie keep a running tab of all of the questions so that we'll develop an FAQ document for everybody to use. So really, when you're thinking about insurance, you're thinking about risk. And what you're doing is, I always tell people, think about things in your real life. Why are you getting insured? You're getting insured and you're paying for insurance so that in case something happens, you're covered and the money's not coming out of your own pocket. So it's the exact same thing. when you're getting your insurance for your project or whatever it may be for the state. So the only thing that you can do, first of all, is you have to understand your risk. So you have to understand what can go wrong in your project. And in order to know what can go wrong in your project, you have to know your scope of work. So you have to review your grant agreement and work with your staff member at DOLA in Division of Housing to understand your scope of work, what things could possibly go wrong. And that's where that checklist is going to come in handy as well. So that's what this slide is. Make a list of the things that could possibly go wrong. And that's just like, even if you were getting homeowners insurance, do I live in a flood area? Do I do this? What could possibly happen to my house? Would it get hit by hail or anything like that? Same thing. You can switch aside. So this one I like this slide because it shows you a piece of your grant agreement. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this particular section. And I asked that the provision be put in there that you need to provide your certificate of insurance every year. They typically only run on a yearly basis. Insurance companies might issue them for 2 years. Kind of depends on the cost and it depends on the project. But I'd like for the Division of Housing to check in once a year. And that'll be one of the performance milestones. As long as it's in your grant agreement, you'll be able to better remember it, and so will the program staff. So you'll want to do it annually. You'll submit it to your DOH program team. They'll review it. And I typically really like to have the grantee, which is most of you, and the DOH program staff team review it together. It's really important that you build that relationship with your DOH team member. The more you do that, the better you'll understand all of these different documentations that we need. So, as you know, insurance protects against third-party claims, but it also protects you as the responsible contractor. You can go ahead.
Brenda, I want to stop you here just to reiterate one thing on this slide, just to make sure
Okay.
everybody knows it. That second bullet, that grantees acting as pass-through entities must also verify that all of their subawards are complying with these requirements. So it's kind of like the Russian nesting dolls here, right? The Division of Housing has our requirements of you, and then you of your subawards have these same requirements. So as we're checking and working with you all in your certificates, if you've entered into subawards, that same requirement needs to pass down. So just wanted to reiterate that because I know at least on the Thor team, we have a lot of folks acting as pass-through entities.
And that gets kind of frightening for people when they read that. They're like, what do you mean I have to keep track of all my subawards and get all of their insurance certificates? And I'd like you to think about it in the sense of, well, if my subcontractor screws something up and they don't have an insurance policy to pay out and they don't have the money, well, who's going to pay? You are. And then the state's going to expect their money back. So it's really important that you collect those insurance certificates from them to make sure that you're covered, just like we collect the insurance certificate from you to make sure that we're covered. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the sense that we're not expecting you to bring us a big file of every insurance certificate, but we might ask you to verify it in some sort of fashion. And that's really going to be up to Nellie and her team and what they develop and how they want to go about doing that. And thank you for bringing that up. Now, most of you hopefully are familiar with what this little pretty document. It's also known as an insurance accord. So if you hear me using that word accord, all it is a certificate of insurance or COI. And these can be one of those things that you kind of get in the mail and then you go, okay, and then you file it away and you don't look at it again. But what this training is about is we're going to show you block by block how to look at it. And that's important because I want all of you to be insured properly and be able to ask the right questions. So, what is this thing? Well, it's the thing that's issued by your insurance company. We get these in our personal life. They might look a little bit different, but basically it's the same thing. And it will tell us, it's going to verify to us that you are covered. And it's going to list the date that it's valid for. We found a lot that were 2-3 years old. And you might have a new one, but we didn't know that. And it's also going to tell us the dollar limits. In your grant agreements, I think it's section 10, it will tell you we're going to need commercial general liability. Basically, what this training is going to do is it's just going to follow straight through as if we're going through those provisions. And it will show you where on this document you'll find those things. So the primary content, of course, is going to be the name of the business. It's going to be the insured, the insurable interest. What are we insuring for? It's going to be the name of the business, and that's you, the grantee. Where are we doing the work? It's going to be, we have to be listed, and not necessarily DOLA. It can be just the state of Colorado, because DOLA is considered the state of Colorado. But a lot of agencies do like to put state of Colorado and then put Division of Housing or Department of Local Affairs. And it really doesn't make a difference. It can be either one. And then we're going to talk about the different types of coverages, whether it's general liability, auto liability, etc. Now, each insurance carrier gets a grade. Just like we all got grades, they get grades. And you want to be really careful because the state really only prefers that the insurance companies that you use have a B+ rating or better. And what we're doing is giving you the link here where you can look up your insurance company. Just like in your personal life, you wouldn't want an insurance company that it's a D or an F. That's kind of scary. They may not be able to pay out. Same thing with the state. They want to make sure that you have a good insurance carrier. So this is something, kind of, well, it's not fun to go look at, but maybe it is. But it's just something to do. Go look at your insurance carrier. Now we start getting into where we're going to break down that pretty certificate at the very beginning and show you each box. So you've got your top box in the right-hand corner, and that's going to be the date the certificate was issued. That date is important because we're going to look at that and say, okay, a year later, the thing is expired. That's why that performance milestone is important, because that needs to line up with this date. So a year after you submit this insurance certificate is when we're going to be looking for a new one. And that's why that date's important. And some have come in without dates. So then we have the box number 2. I don't know why the state calls it producer, but basically it's the insurance broker, your insurance company that wrote the policy for you. And it should include that insurance company's name, address, and phone number. Number 3 is going to be their grant agent the agent contact information. And then you've got number 4, which is you, the name of the company or person who owns the insurance policy. So you paid for it, you own it. And we want to have you include your name and address in this box. And then oftentimes we don't get our insurance from the exact same insurance company. So we might have an insurance company that covers us for auto. We might have an insurance company that covers us for pollution. And we might have another insurance company that covers us for crime insurance. And that's what number 5 is. So you might have A, B, C, D, E insurance company. And remember this box and the A, B, C, D, and E, because that'll be important, and I'll be pointing out where that'll be listed further on in the insurance accord. So the first thing that you're going to read when you go through the insurance policy is you're going to see that the state is going to require commercial general liability insurance. And in and of itself, that sentence makes no sense. What is that? Well, it covers employers' liability to things other than automobile. We cover that separately. So when you're out there and they're doing their work, somebody gets hurt or there's property damage to either state or private property, that's what this commercial general liability insurance covers. Just a few examples. Our reputations are very important. That's what advertising injury is. So if somebody slanders you or libels you or invades your privacy or copyright, you're covered under this. That's a really important thing people don't think about. If your company all of a sudden gets a bad reputation, that's not a good thing. You may not get business anymore. You may not get a grant anymore because you're not viewed as reliable. You've got your bodily injury. So, and it's not just somebody falling. That's a different thing. Sometimes that'll be covered under workers' comp, but this can be bodily injury, sickness, exposure to something causing disease, and contractual liability, which is where there's an assumption of a contractor's party liability under specified conditions. And we'll talk about that a little bit later under subrogation. Now, Nellie made this really teeny tiny knowing that I'm old. And so if I skip a beat, I'm gonna blame her. Now, getting down to the first section, you see next to the number 6, you see the letter A. And you remember when I told you might have different insurance companies. So here we have insurance company A, and I'd be able to refer to the top and see what insurance company it is. And that's what that column is. So in the commercial general liability portion, the letter indicates which insurance company it is. The commercial general liability box must be checked. That must include the coverages for the premises, and it'll say fire damage, independent contractors, those such things. Occurrence box either has to have an X or an N. Now, the state always uses an X. I prefer an N. Answer the thing yes or no, yes or no, yes or no, all the way down the column. Do you have it? Hopefully you do. If you don't, be honest about it and put an N. Is there an additional insured? Put a yes or a no. Is there a subrogation waiver? Put a yes or no. Now we're going to talk about what these things mean a little bit later on in the presentation, but just keep that in mind. We want to know your policy number, and we want to know the effective date. That goes in that white square area. And we want to know what limits you have. Do you have the minimum requirements on the state contract? And it's in that section, in section 10, and it will tell you what the limits are. And what your group here at DOH is going to be looking for is that those dollar amounts match what's in your grant. Then we get to the automobile liability insurance. And there's a couple things here that people don't know. Now, it does cover the financial responsibility if your employee is at fault in an accident and people are injured or property is damaged. So it's required if anybody's going to be using their automobile in the scope of the work. And then again, it gets back to knowing your scope of work, because if you don't use your car and you don't have a car and you're basically sitting at a computer doing data work, you don't need this. You don't need this insurance, and we can waive it and save you some money. Now, typically the requirement is 1 million for each accident in a combined single limit, and it includes hired and non-owned coverage. And it means that the most that will be paid for an accident, including bodily injury, is 1 million. And that's what we're looking for. Now, a couple things I want you to consider is hired automobile coverage. Those are automobiles that are for exclusive use and control and been temporarily given for that use. So it could be a borrowed automobile, and it does not include those borrowed from an employee. And then it also includes those non-owned automobiles, those that are owned by employees and used for the company business. I've done this before. I've used my own own car and had it covered by the state. So those, you really do need to know your scope of work in order to know whether you need these types of insurance coverages. And what do you know? There's a section for it on the form. So again, here you'll see that you have a different insurer B for your automobile insurance. So what do we need? We want any auto to be covered. If it's waived and you don't use your car, you're going to have an N. Excuse me a second, my computer thinks it wants to reboot. And again, your subrogation, did you waive it? And in this case, we wrote yes. And again, we will discuss that later. Policy numbers, and then the limits. What is crime insurance? What does that even mean? A lot of people think it's just breaking into their business or something like that. Well, crime insurance is a little more than that. It includes the theft of money, securities, or property by employees through forgery, robbery, and electronic crime. I get a lot of, well, I'm just out there building a building. So why do I need crime insurance? They're not going to have access to any money. True, but do you have a budget officer? Do you have somebody that's taking care of that grant money and making sure that it's being allocated properly to your subcontractors and such? Those are the things you need to think about. Even janitorial services. So I want you to really think long and hard about your scopes of work, because this is important because you can use it instead of a bond. I've had a lot of people come to me and say, look, I've got crime insurance. Do I need to bond? Maybe not. And I'm the person that the people are going to come to in DOH to ask. So the limit's based on the maximum amount of state money the grantee will have access. So how much did we give you? And that's what's going to drive this crime insurance. Nice picture, by the way. I like that. Builder's risk. This covers the property during construction. This is what most people are familiar with. And it's required when the grantee or its sub-grantees, and those are those pass-through entities that Nellie mentioned at the beginning, will construct or substantially renovate a state building, or they're building something for us. So it applies not only to the property, and this is what people don't really get, but also to the property at your storage. It also applies to like building materials that are in transit. So it's really good coverage to have. So let's say you have lumber being delivered and it was a hailstorm and all of a sudden it's all rotted and cracked, it will cover it. So it's very helpful to have this coverage. And again, it's based, people don't know that the limit is based on the completed value of the project. I want you to know these policies are not very expensive and they can be tailored to meet your timelines. Don't let your insurance company bully you into thinking, well, you have to buy a year. You don't. If your contract or your grant is only for 6 months and it's only going to take 6 months, why should you pay for a year? So this is why this training also, so you know these things. Now, purchasing this might seem unnecessary, but don't wait to the end to try to get something done. Don't wait until the inspection to try to figure out whether you need insurance, because you're not going to get insured after the fact. And insurers should be communicating this to their agencies.
Thanks, Brenda. No, super helpful information. Keeping an eye on the chat here. I haven't seen any questions come through yet, so I take that as we are doing such an exceptional job of making this clear. Please make sure to put any questions in the chat. I just wanted to reiterate, Brenda, I was thinking about this the first time you did this training for our staff, and thinking of the group here. A lot of our grantees that just have services dollars where they are not doing any construction whatsoever, but with the Division of Housing grant, this would be an example of a coverage that's waived for them, right, at the point of grant.
Yes,
But thinking
exactly.
about our navigation campuses or the folks who are constructing new facilities or rehabbing, those are the folks where they really want to be working with their insurance broker here to have
Yep.
that coverage during construction. Awesome.
Exactly. And I take not having any questions as I'm confusing the heck out of people.
No, I
So,
think you're doing great. We did get one in the chat is, can we send the presentation after? Apologies, I didn't say that. Yes, we'll send the slides for this, the recording, as well as that PDF of the checklist afterwards. So, yep, thanks all.
now pollution and environmental insurance is another one that people just really despise. And I am going to read this. Coverage for loss or damages resulting from the unexpected releases of pollutants, typically excluded from the general liability and property insurance policies. You can go to sleep here if you don't do any construction. The losses and damages coverage usually arise in the form of claims against insureds for bodily injury, property damage, cleanup, and business interruption. This is required when your subgrantee is providing directly or indirectly work. Now think about things like you're rehabbing a building and it has a wall on it, and the building is from pre-1970. You know that building has asbestos in it. And you might have it might get released. Or you might have something where you're digging a hole and you come across an oil tank or something like that, or there's an oil spill. It's really good to have this kind of coverage. Most people don't want it. They think it's expensive. It's not. And but I will always talk to people about the contractual liability coverage, because the policy limits go along with how expensive your grant is. And I'm more than happy to work with people if they feel like they need some help in terms of getting their coverage. Now, I'm going to let everybody read this when they get to it, because it's, just nice reading in the green box. But I really want to focus more on the right-hand side. The newer pollution policies cover the entire lifespan of a property, cradle to grave. So that really begins when you bought the property, and it lasts all the way through it when it's abandoned and sold. And it's really important because you could be sued for anything in between, and you want to have this coverage. And many recent pollution policies that I've noticed include exposures such as asbestos and lead-based paint, whereas they didn't used to. Such known exposures used to be widely excluded. So it's not expensive, and it's good to have. And I had them put a lot of examples in the green box there for you. And because we do have a lot of people that don't have, they're not building things, I'm going to let you all read this. And if there's any questions, you can ask questions later. Property and hazard insurance, again, it covers the business physical assets. It protects commercial properties, all the equipment and the inventory and their tangible assets from risks and perils. It helps your business recover financially in the event of property damage or loss, such as fire, but it also includes theft, vandalism, natural disasters, and other specified perils. Specified perils, what does that mean? It's spelled out in your insurance policy. Again, getting back to the scope of work, I cannot emphasize that enough, how much I want not only the DOH staff, but everybody that has an insurance policy to understand their scope of work. I don't want you paying for insurance you don't need, and I want to make sure you have insurance that you do need. And this basically tells you an example. I went out there, pardon me, and did some research. And small businesses are currently paying an average of about $67 a month or $800 annually for commercial property insurance. So about 2/3 or 62% of the customers are spending $100 or less. It is worth it. I've seen some disasters happen where people have lost a lot of money. And so I can't stress enough how important this is. But again, based on your scope of work, I'm willing to talk about what you need.
Brenda, we're getting some fabulous questions coming in the chat here. And I think it was either on this one or the slide right before. We saw a question come through asking from Lynette, does this cover meth contamination? So I think either the pollution and environmental insurance, or it might have come through on the property hazard insurance.
And I didn't get the question, I'm sorry.
Does this coverage cover meth contamination? So let's say like a library or a shelter, if they test and they realize there's contamination from meth.
Pollution and environmental.
Pollution and environmental. Lynette's wondering if that would cover that.
That actually is good question. It's actually one of the newer things that is covered. We're finding that more and more burial, things like that. So yes.
That's great. And then just want to, Carol, we're going to kick your question to the end so we can go back to that slide and look at it. But while we're in this section as well, we saw a question from Nancy. If we're using licensed contractors, shouldn't they have some of these coverages? Is her question.
Yes. Yes. And that is where we were talking about the pass-through entities. Make sure that they do, because that covers you. Excellent question. That's why you want to make sure that they do when you hire them.
Awesome. Sweet. Thanks, Brenda. Keep on going.
Where are we? Okay, I think we're done with that slide. Okay, workers' comp. Anybody who's been injured on the job is familiar with this. It's insurance to cover the employer's liability to employees and their families for work-related injury on a no-fault basis. Nobody meant to get hurt, but they did. So, if you have employees, you need this insurance. Required by state law. And there is no limit. The statutory limit plus employer's liability. So, owners and partners are not required to have workers' compensation. Or if you don't have employees, obviously, you don't need this. So I've had a lot of people write in on their letterhead, I don't have employees, it's just me. Do I need this insurance? No, you don't. But you can be sure that we're going to look, because Colorado Department of Labor and Employment has a list of people who do have employees and don't. So no fudging here. We can look it up. What about sole proprietorship? Sole proprietors don't need to have this coverage. Next slide. So now we get to things where people just really don't. What is umbrella liability? What does that even mean? Well, now we're down to A and B again. Same thing, just a different section here. Umbrella liability is optional. And really truly think of it as an umbrella. It covers everything that might not be. It captures everything that might not have been captured anywhere else. You can buy it as an additional coverage or excess coverage to cover anything that you couldn't get covered under your other. So your commercial general liability, your auto liability, your general liability, things like that, to make up that difference. So you might be able to get an umbrella liability insurance from another like in insurance company C. And again, the additional insured and subrogation waiver boxes have to be checked. The policy number needs to be listed. Workers' compensation, same thing. Any proprietor, so I'm going to back up here and say that I want to read this because it's important because of that question that came in. Employer's liability insurance covers any contractor or subcontractors acting within the course and scope of their employment. The way it reads in the contract and grant is that everything that the contractor has to have, subcontractor has to have. So, as a contractor, you would have employees. As a subcontractor, they would have employees. So you just want to make sure that the insurance, they have the same insurance that you do. But any proprietor, partner, or executive officer is excluded. They carry their own insurance. They don't need workers' comp. And also, if you're a sole proprietorship, no, you don't need this, and you would have it waived. What's professional liability? Well, it's errors and omissions. Well, what does that mean? It's professional liability insurance protects your business when your employees make mistakes in the professional services they're providing to clients. Required when a grantee or a subaward is providing professional or technical insurance. Think about medical, legal. We never make mistakes, us legal people, just saying. And engineering, architectural, real estate appraisal, computer program, those kind of things. Oops. It's a standard to require the coverage to be written on an occurrence basis. Think about that because you're bringing in an attorney or you're bringing in an architect or you're bringing in an engineer. They typically don't stay for the duration of the project. So you want to do it on an occurrence basis. If a policy is written on an occurrence form, but if a policy written on an occurrence form is not available, the agencies can agree to purchase a 2-year extended reporting period policy. That is not important for you to remember right now. When it comes right down to it, I'm here to help you. Excuse me. And this very, very rarely comes up, but I want you to be aware of each thing in your grant. Excuse me, second.
Oh, good. Brenda, I'm wondering on this one, I feel like it's making sense to me kind of like hypothetically, but trying to think of maybe more of a real world example of like when this is coming up. So like my head is going to all of the medical procedural shows I've watched of like, you know, a doctor who maybe makes a costly mistake in a procedure or something like that. Is this what this is getting at? That if they're in the course of their actions, an error is made that has, you know, a net harm, this coverage steps in?
Let me bring it around to something like architectural.
Yeah, that'd be great.
You have an architect. He sketches out all these great designs. You start to build it according to his designs, and the building falls apart. That's the kind of stuff that you're being protected against. Legal, you get some bad legal advice. You want to be protected against that. Same thing with an engineer. You folks that don't have that aren't doing buildings and things like that, I'm trying to think of you might be working with is it low income housing? I'm trying to think of people where they might hire medical staff just to scope out everything, make sure everything's set. That's where your medical would come in.
Gotcha.
So those are the kind of things you're looking at.
Yeah, case managers and thinking of behavioral health specialists, folks like that. Yeah, makes total sense. Thank you.
Cyber liability, everybody's thinking about AI now, right? Everybody can get into everybody's business. So you want to have cyber liability because of privacy assurance. What does everybody think of? HIPAA. And so if you're doing any kind of data work for the state, there could be data breaches. Any type of confidential information. We've heard these horror stories of people being, can you guys hear that noise in the background? Okay, good, because they're cutting down trees next door. So you want to have this insurance if there's any possibility that somebody can get into data. And it just really comes back down to HIPAA, and you want to be covered for any kind of records that you might be keeping. And then we get down to our additional coverages. The box might be empty, but it's always a good idea to list anything else that you might have covered, like your professional liability can go here, and your additional insureds can go here, your privacy insurance can go here, and all the limits. So it's really a blank space for you to tell us what else you have.
Brenda, we've gotten some questions in the chat here before we move on to other ones. There was a question from Bob about the privacy insurance. The question says, the checklist says it's required if you are a HIPAA business associate. Is it still required if you're only collecting HMIS or homelessness management information system data? They acquired it and it was very expensive.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Bob, because typically the state is coming down to, yes, you have to have it, but risk management and myself are willing to look at that and say that always doesn't make sense. So again, with your scope of work, I'll take a look at that, and we'll look at it on a case-by-case basis and see whether you need it or not.
For sure. And I think, Brenda, just to jump into some additional like HMIS nerding out data here. So HMIS in and of itself is not, it does not meet the threshold for HIPAA. So the amount of information exclusively required in HMIS. However, Bob, not familiar with your work, if y'all are keeping medical case files for folks that you might have, folks through a street outreach team providing direct street medicine. If the work that you're doing is meeting that HIPAA threshold, then you would be required to have it. But the bare minimum information put into HMIS, as I understand it, does not reach that HIPAA threshold here. So that's the kind of stuff why it really makes it a case-by-case conversation here. Is there additional information that you're collecting that would trigger the requirement of that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nellie.
For sure. And then Brenda, there was another one from Susan. Is professional liability insurance required by the state if they only provide services, is Susan's question.
Well, it depends on the type of services. Because if they're professional services, then you would need it. And again, this is very rare that people are going to need. Now, if you're building something, you're going to need an engineer or an architect. Very rare you're going to need the medical or the legal. But again, the services could be professional, or they could be personal, or they could be construction. I can't answer that question because it's generally based on your grant.
For sure. So really specific. So Susan, reaching out to your DOH program staff, kind of talking about your specific scope of work. And then Heather, I'm going to kick your question to the end too, and we'll lump some of these auto ones together for us to go back to those slides. So yeah, I think we're good, Brenda. Thank you. Keep on going.
Okay, additional insured. We really like this here at the state because the additional insured status means that we're protected in the state. If there's a legal claim that arises, mostly people like to sue, and they're going to sue you and they're going to sue us because they view the state as having deep pockets. But we know that's not true. The state doesn't have a lot of money, right? So during a contracted road construction project, a motorist hits debris and damages their vehicle. So they're going to sue the contractor and they're going to sue the state. So if you list the state as an additional insured, then the contractor's insurance will pay for the state's defense. And we like that. So that's why we like to be listed here. And see how it's listed where it says Department of Local Affairs, Division of Housing. That line doesn't have to be there, but a lot of agencies do put it. If you just put State of Colorado, that's fine as well. Additional insured. Now, this is what we were talking about when we said pass through agencies. These are your sub grantees. So you are our grantee, and if you give money further down, those are what we consider sub grantees or pass through entities. So you're the pass through entity, we're giving it to you, and then you can give it to somebody else. And then we want to make sure that everybody's in compliance. So the pass through entities, you must collect certificates of insurance from your pass through entities. So you become a pass through entity to your sub awardees and make sure that they're in compliance. And we want to see that thing 30 days before the expiration date of each policy. And a copy of the actual insured endorsement and alternate employer's endorsement must be supplied. If you don't furnish it, you have the immediate right, but not the obligation, to procure a subcontractor's expense, which the contractor can offset the required insurance. This is a lot of words just to say, make sure your subcontractors or your subgrantees are insured. You want to be covered. And the DOH staff be monitoring that as well. Realize that you're going to have these slides, and reading of these slides oftentimes doesn't make any sense to do because it's a lot of verbiage to say one sentence. And that's what I'm trying to get at. So your description of operations, your location of your vehicles, any of that kind of stuff, that's what you're going to put in box 11. In other words, tell the state as much as you can. Name your additional insured, name your primacy of coverage. Box 12, that's your certificate holder, that's us. Box 13, you have to have this exact language that's in the quotes. And then 14, your authorized representative. Should we ask our subgrant awardees to list us? Yes. Noah, the answer to your question is yes. What's an irrevocable letter of credit? Sometimes it's known as acquiring self-insurance. A lot of people, a lot of grantees say it's too expensive for them to go out and get insurance. Then that means that they go to their bank. And banks are very, very used to this. So you go to your bank and you say, look, these are the insurance coverages that I need. Can you help me? And they'll give you a letter of credit. And basically what that says is that the subcontractor and the insurer will, let me put it to you this way. If I went to my bank and said, listen, I need all this insurance and I just can't do it, but I want to do this project and I'm getting this grant, the bank will write you a letter that says, okay, if something happens, we'll act like an insurance company and we'll pay out the money. That's all this is. They will pay out the money, and it's an irrevocable letter, meaning they can't revoke it. Once it's been executed, you are covered. That's what this is about. And that's why it's self-insurance. You went to the bank by yourself and got some insurance from the bank. And here's a little diagram to show you how it works. So the insured requests the bank to issue a letter of credit in favor of insurer and agrees to reimburse the bank, reimburse the bank for payments made to the insurer. The bank agrees to honor drafts drawn by the insurer, and then the insured agrees to pay the premiums. So a letter is a demand instrument. Therefore, if the beneficiary makes a demand, the bank must pay. They have to, whether it's justified or not. So it's always, insurers generally prefer these letters of credit than other forms of collateral because you know you're going to get paid, it's going to pay out. And these are the kind of things that are, I just gave a sample. Don't stress about these kind of things. These are the kind of things that are generally that I have a discussion with the grantee and with the DOH staff member because they're not often seen. Yes, Nellie.
Yeah, just want to reiterate, where I have seen this the most is with units of local government. That's where that's really come up. So if nonprofits are wondering, is this relevant to me? In my experience personally, we've seen this mostly with cities, municipalities, and other folks who have requirements around self-insurance. So just putting that out there.
That's good to know. Okay. Waiver of subrogation. I like to use the example of subrogation as, I'll use a personal example. Years and years ago, my house burnt down because the electrical lines were put in wrong. So what happened is that my insurance company, which would be, let's say, insurance company A, paid me so that I could get a new home and furniture and whatnot. Then they filed subrogation against the electrical company's insurance company to get their money back. That's what that means. So it's the relinquishment by an insurer of the right to collect from another party for damages paid on the behalf of the insured. It protects the insurance company from the third party negligence. So that's why that column is really important. A grantee's employee injures himself on state property. The grantee's workers' compensation insurance pays the employee. If there's no waiver of subrogation, that insurance company can come back and try to claim the cost from the state. So you always want to waive that. You don't want to have them coming back and filing subrogation.
I just wanted to highlight that these boxes indicating yes and no is one of the most common missing fields that we saw on COIs in our most recent reviews. We often found these columns empty. But Brenda, what you're saying is they must be indicated yes or no.
Yes.
Thank you.
Requesting to waive an insurance requirement. I get these every day. I'm used to it. DOLA's DOH requires approval before waiving any insurance requirement. And this will not be approved by your DOH program team, but by me. So what you do is you find the provisions you want waived. I want to see it on your letterhead, a justification for it. You submit it to your DOH team member, and then they come to me. And I'll either say yes or no, or maybe so.
That's great. Brenda, if you can believe it, that is the end of our content as we had it. So
And we're on time.
we're on time here. So I'm going to kind of do some wrap up and then we got some fabulous questions in the chat. We've got a couple minutes here for some more. So if you had some other questions, feel free to chat those through. Brenda, thank you so much for this presentation. Really appreciating you taking the time to share your expertise and break this down for us step by step. Want to reiterate just some high level points here. You know, Brenda mentioned this a couple times. It's hard for us to make give blanket answer to some questions because this presentation is really just giving you that general information because every scope of work is unique. So what we really recommend that you do is take the scope of work that you have with your DOH grant, take your COI that you've got on file, take this checklist and kind of look at the intersection of all of those and come to us with your case specific questions. Also want to really reiterate the importance for all of us of thoroughly reading these agreements before we execute them. So understanding what you might have signed on to, you know, when you executed your grant agreement and knowing that the time really to negotiate that we would request is before you execute it when it's in that draft Word document state. But if you do realize you have questions, please reach out to your DOH staff as you're looking through that. And while you do not need these certificates of insurance or these accords often, when you do need them, they are critically important. So that is why we are asking you to send these to us on that annual basis to ensure that you continue to have these necessary coverages to protect you, your staff, and your work. Again, want to reiterate, for folks serving as pass-through entities, you must collect and review these certificates of insurance from your subawards on an annual basis as well. So those requirements that we have of you pass on from you to your subawards. Again, reach out to DOH as you have questions about your the requirements in your grant agreement or your contract. And if you have questions about your insurance policy, the right person to go to is your insurance broker. So Casey is not going to be able to answer those questions on your insurance policy, but you can answer the questions that you have about the scope of work. So just knowing who to direct those questions to now. Well, with that, I'm going to direct some questions to Brenda that we've got. Casey, if you wouldn't mind clicking back maybe to the right to the beginning to some of the auto insurance. Brenda, we got a question if you have time. Could you share again what hired auto is? And would it include something like maybe an agency using Colorado Car Share?
Yes,
Yes, so it would cover, so just
that's
to
a
reiterate,
really
yeah,
good
what is hired
example.
auto? Yeah,
If you go and just, you're renting automobiles because you don't have the enough, that's what a hired automobile is.
great. Thank you, Brenda. And then there was another question. Do you need any auto insurance if there is no requirement for staff to drive for their job?
No,
No. Okay, so this would be an example. You're a fully remote workforce. There's no in-person meetings. There's no required trainings. You are never going to have someone on the wheel or on the road as a requirement. And then this would be an example of something that's waived.
that's correct.
Cool. And you're just cruising through these. I love it. Another question that came through was we have a lot of private information on clients, but not necessarily HIPAA level records. Do we still need to have that cybersecurity information insurance? Privacy information.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. It was that this individual or this organization collects a lot of PII or private information about clients, but it doesn't reach the level of HIPAA requirements. Would they still need to have privacy or cyber insurance under their award?
Privacy insurance, yes, they do.
Okay, they still do because they're still collecting PII?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. And again, if you have questions about your specific scope of work, feel free to reach out and we can connect and bring Brenda in here too. Saw a question here in the chat from Gregory. Can you please discuss claims made versus occurred requirement?
I'm trying to think. A claims made insurance is occurrence is individual. Claims made is cumulative. So think about, pardon me. Think about if you have an insurance policy that runs for a year and you're paying for it for a year and you've got a claims made policy. So any claim made during that period of time has to be covered under that insurance policy. Whereas if you have an occurrence based, it's just a one-off. So it's better to have an insurance based on an occurrence based so that you're just dealing with that one-off and you're not dealing with this huge liability that might come in. And again, that's something that's a little more down deep in the weeds that most of you are not going to have to deal with at all. And I would say just stick with the occurrence base.
Gotcha. Thanks for that, Brenda. So a couple other quick ones. There's a question from Artie. Is terrorism insurance required by the state?
The state has been looking at that. As of right now, no. But it's something that's being legislatively looked at, and so it might be in the future.
Gotcha. And then a great one to end on here. I just appreciated this one. You know, are these requirements just for state of Colorado grants, or are these insurance coverages typically required by all grant funders?
Anything that comes, DOHI is really a pass-through agency itself. So we'll get money from the feds and then it moves on to you. So the money may not be coming from the state initially, but you still need to be covered.
Thanks, Brenda.
I think I understood that.
I think you did too. So this training is specific to the state of Colorado's requirements. Brenda's saying we're a pass-through entity. There might be other agencies or other funders that you're working with that have similar or different coverages as well. So, all righty. Well, I know we're at time. I'm going to wrap up here with next steps. So you are going to be receiving an email after this training with the slides, the recording, with the checklist as well. We are going to be asking the Transformational Homelessness Response Grantees and other OHI programs might be asking this as well, to use that checklist to conduct a self-assessment. So you're going to look through your COI, you're going to look through that checklist, and you're going to make sure that every box that's checked there is indeed following that. There's a section at the very bottom for any folks that are self-insured of just what are the steps for that requirement. You are going to contact your insurance broker to correct any fields that you notice are out of compliance. So if you're missing a date, if you're missing one of those X's or N's on there, you're going to work with your insurance broker to make sure the certificate has everything that we need. And then you're going to resubmit your certificate of insurance to your DOH program staff as requested. So we'll have that on file. And then the final step here, again, our pass-through entities are going to complete this training, complete this review process with your sub-awards as well. So passing that on through. As always, please reach out to your Division of Housing staff as you have questions. We're here to support you in this. And please, everyone, join me in a rousing round of applause for Brenda Lujan. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Brenda. Really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us all.
I couldn't have done it without my my other girls. They were so great. And everybody, thank you for taking an hour out of your day for coming. I really appreciate it. And know that these will be available to review and to look at again. And I'm always available for you to reach out to.
Great. Well, thank you, Brenda. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.